Hello, welcome to NCGR in Conversation. I am so excited because I am here today with Lars, who is, let me change my view and get you on, Lars, who is in the NCGR Los Angeles chapter with me. He's the outreach director, I'm the vice president, and new to the NCGR board. So welcome, Lars.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Rachel.
Yeah. So our conversation today is going to be about Saturn Return. Lars is on the front lines in the thick of Saturn Return right now, and so I thought, what a great opportunity to talk about this really pivotal transit that we all go through. And so that's going to be what our conversation is focusing on. But first, before we get into Saturn Return, Lars, tell us a little bit about what brought you to astrology.
For sure. Yeah. So I started really taking note of astrology and studying in the early 2010s, mid 2010s, and just sort of a voracious student. I have a 4-planet Sag stellium in the ninth house with my midheaven being in Sag as well. So very much all about learning and diving kind of body first, I'll say, just my entire body into something that I'm really interested in. And it wasn't until Saturn entered Sagittarius at the end of 2016 into 2017, I want to say, and it was just like on top of that stellium where I kind of matured and took the leap from being just like a student of it into like really becoming more of a practitioner myself. And then with my Saturn return that happened this year, I have become a professional. I started learning really, deeply in the, I'd say, early mid 2010s. And it wasn't until Sag went into Sagittarius, because I have a ninth house stellium in Sagittarius, my midheavens in Sagittarius, very much someone who is really about higher learning, higher education, philosophy, that sort of thing. When I feel like when Saturn entered Sagittarius, it really kind of leveled me up or made a focus on maturity where I started to be a practitioner. And then with my Saturn return, I became a full-on professional with it. So I definitely attribute Saturn kind of, I don't want to say solely because so many things are interconnected, as you know, in astrology, but Saturn was a big influence in my astrology journey.
And because of that, would you mind telling us a little bit about your natal Saturn? Like, where is it in your chart? What aspects is it applying to other planets?
Yeah, for sure. And, I'm happy to break it down. I'm a quadrant house system user, proud user of Regiomontanus, but I have dabbled in Campanus and also Placidus. But so, like, in regards to my opinion, I have Aquarius at 3 degrees, Saturn in Aquarius at 3 degrees in the 11th house. If you were a whole sign house user, because I'm a Pisces rising, it would be in the 12th house, but it rules my 11th and 12th.
Mm-hmm. So have you noticed changes since Saturn's been in Aquarius? Have you noticed changes in your 11th house matters in that area of your life?
For sure. I think one really funny thing is that the day that Saturn entered the same degree of my natal Saturn placement, the day it went from 2 degrees and some odd minutes to 3 degrees and 0 minutes, I got the email that I was elected to the National NCGR board, which is a very 11th house, big circuitous club, very big organization, if you will, and one off of the 11th having tied to the career, because when Saturn first entered Aquarius, I announced I was going to be a professional astrologer. So I feel like it very much is in tandem with that.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, because we went through that period where Saturn dipped into Aquarius and then went back into
Mm-hmm.
Capricorn. And have you noticed a difference now that it's fully in Aquarius? That have you noticed a difference in any way in any way in your life?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing, and this applies to Saturn and a lot of the other big movers, is when they do that thing where they dip one way and then they dip another way, like back into what they were present in for such a long time, for like one last little trip, and they come forward. I view that little blip of Aquarius, that was like earlier 2020, and thinking about it, right? That was like April, May 2020-ish. I feel like that is when you get like a whisper, or you get almost like when a TV show shows you like next week on enter show here on your life. I feel like it kind of gave me a little preview of like what I need to take seriously. And then Saturn rules perceived limitations in a lot of the ways in which we restrict ourselves. And in that time, I had just kind of entered lockdown and was really sitting with myself. And I feel like it was a big whisper into kind of like my own dialogue and the ways in which I limit myself, if you will. And so now that Saturn is fully in Aquarius, I feel like I'm hitting the ground running given that preview. Not only in regards to professional ways in which I've had to mature and how it rules my 11th house, but in really embracing the lockdown kind of restrictive atmosphere that Saturn and Aquarius has brought with everyone being in quarantine, and really kind of not trying to fight it, and really kind of uh, learning about the ways in which I've structured myself, if you will, and kind of I feel like the Saturn return is about confronting what structures do and don't work within yourself, and like building new structures.
Mhm.
And I'm doing that on the real psyche level.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Actually, let's back up just a little bit, just in case people listening don't know what Saturn return is. Um,
Oh, sure, yeah.
how would you describe it? How would you define it?
I mean, I feel like Saturn Return is one of the two things that people have heard the name of, right? And maybe they can't like kind of put their finger on exactly that and Mercury retrograde. Everyone knows what Mercury retrograde is. Saturn Return people have heard of as well. And in my opinion, because Saturn is the ruler of structure and perceived limitation, restriction, and discipline, the Saturn Return happens every 29 years and is kind of like a microscope on yourself, on the structures in which you've erected in your own life, whether actively or like without realizing it, potentially the structures around you that do and don't complement your life path. And it's a very, I think the build up to the Saturn return is very restless. You might feel like you're running out of time, or you might feel like helpless, if you will. But it's really to kind of confront the ways in which you're getting in your own way. In regards to the clients that I've counseled through their Saturn return and going through my own, that's kind of the core thread.
Yeah, I like that. It's also a time, two other things too. It's also a time when you're separating from the ideas and beliefs and sort of the constructs of your family and your past and your
Hmm.
history. And it's also a time when you're facing, like you said, your limitations. And one thing that can happen during a Saturn return year or leading up to that is health complications, or things that
Hmm.
actually that impose limits on you. So have you had any of those, or have you experienced any of that in your Saturn return?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And actually, I'm going to use a word that's like one of the most Saturnian words, I feel like, very shortly. But I've been a competitive tennis player, recreational, not no Andre Agassi here by any means, but I travel the country competing in recreational tournaments like that level. And for years, I've had a continual elbow injury that me being my Sag self would just power through, and for the love of the game and for competitive drive, just kind of dealt with having a tear in a tendon. And then literally it was in that window that I mentioned, the first kind of like sneak peek of Saturn and Aquarius, I tore the entire thing off. I ruptured the entire tendon. And if you think about that, like that has a lot to do with the structure, the physical structure of my body, and the fact that I was choosing to ignore like the actual physical limitations that my body was telling me it was struggling with, right? Just out of sight, out of mind, even though it was there the entire time. And once I had that Saturn return, it was very much a microscope or a magnifying glass, and like, you can't run away from this. And it resulted in me breaking that last piece off and the entire thing kind of falling apart.
Mm,
So yeah, I have a really cool scar right there. Got cut open and had to have the entire thing repaired. And what was interesting uh, was that when the doctor went in, he said that my body had compensated by calcifying around it.
mm,
And calcification is a big Saturn word.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Saturn is definitely related to like bones, and Capricorn is from medical astrology would be very much related to that. And so it was interesting to see that that was my body's response, was kind of in a Saturnian way. Like it started to calcify and limit my ability to use my arm out of protectiveness.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's an actual literal manifestation of
Literal.
that of that transit. And then the other thing too is, that Saturn relates to our past, our history. It relates to our parental figures, namely
Hmm.
father authority figures in our early childhood. And throughout your recovery, you've actually gone back home, correct?
That's yeah, you like honestly, and like I'm an astrologer too, but it's interesting because astrologers with our own astrology, we're not like there is sort of a subjective objective kind of
Mhm.
thing, right? And I haven't put all the dots together like I do with my clients, and that's so true because of the very literal manifestation of my Saturn return. The best doctor for me to go to happened to be 45 minutes outside of where my parents live, and very much the Sag that I am, once I turned 17, I kept moving further west. I even moved to Europe for a bit. I was like, I've lived in 5 cities before my Saturn return. So the fact that my Saturn return brought me home, and Saturn in Aquarius being very much tied to the lockdowns, the astrology of the lockdowns, the astrology of kind of being physically separated from others, I have lockdown with my dad and my mom, my lineage, if you will, surrounded just by photos and relics of ancestors past. Like it's been very, very Saturnian in all respects.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And do you feel like that experience has in some ways influenced the Saturn return is the beginning of a new cycle, a cycle where you're actually constructing your life in your adult life in many ways.
Mhm.
Do you feel like going back to the past and being with your family of origin has actually informed in some ways how you will structure the next chapter, the post Saturn return chapter?
Yes, I'd say in numerous ways. The first of which, definitely when it's safe to do so, moving back to LA and planting roots. And for someone who's a Sag Sun, Sag Moon, Sag Mercury, Sag Mars saying they're going to plant roots, I think that that really speaks volumes to kind of a maturity. And then in addition to that, done a lot of inner child work to the point in which I feel like I can be my own parent to my own inner child in a very beautiful kind of Saturn return way. And that would have only been possible with me being stuck back in my hometown, kind of, for 11 months. The longest time I've ever spent back in my hometown has been 2 weeks since I left at 17. Um, and so it's definitely really informed a lot about the next Saturn cycle. In addition to that, both of my parents and my brother are scientists and doctors, and I've always been the rainbow sheep who's the astrologer. And they have like garnered a newfound respect for it and like given me their full support and are so proud of me for joining the NCGR board. So there is a beautiful kind of like new cycle versus maybe a couple of years ago, one of my dad's eyebrows would go up a bit.
That's great. I love it. It's so funny. I'm reflecting um, as you're talking that, I started I really fully came out in my practice at my Saturn return as well, like about a year after
Nice.
my Saturn return. And I
Hmm.
remember it felt like a before and after. Like before my Saturn return, I was so nervous you know, about would my parents be okay with this? And I had a lot of concern for how other people thought or saw. And then as soon as I hit my Saturn return, it was like an immediate brain shift of like,
Hmm.
no, this is what I'm doing. I'm committing to this. This is my path. Did you notice anything like that, or was there? I mean, I actually felt like my thinking patterns changed, and like there was a
Hmm.
physical shift for me.
I think it's important to note that I'm still very much in the thick of mine. The exact conjunction, I only got one Saturn return, which lucky me, I will say, since some people can get three exact conjunctions. I will say that Saturn and Sagittarius literally went over like a third of my chart, at the top of my chart, squaring the angle. So that in itself was its own thing. But I had one conjunction that occurred 2 weeks ago. So it's still very much within orb. It's separating, but it's very much within orb of that. So I don't want to speak to something that I haven't fully experienced yet. But what I will say is very much like, once Saturn entered Aquarius, it is very much feeling like there is a maturity. I feel like that, kind of, just like it just kind of like crept up on me. I didn't see it, but it just sort of like, yeah, like this makes sense. But like also last week was this here. There really is a beautiful quality to the Saturn return, or just Saturn in general, that Saturn is all about consequences, but positive consequences are rewards. And like, you have to work for it, but you get it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and I'm also aware of the fact that the second Saturn return has a totally different tone than the first Saturn
Mhm.
return. So I'm getting inspired. I think we might need to have a second Saturn return
Yes,
in
definitely
person.
bookmark it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So now on to I'm going to kind of shift gears just a little bit. Are there any astrology topics that are interesting you these days, or that you're kind of delving into a little bit deeper?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I think for me, the biggest thing has been, and you've been a big part of this actually, has been, I've been running on my YouTube channel with you as the co-host, a taking the scare out of the square, kind of initiative, which has been my big thing, because one of the aspects in my chart that, as a wee little student, up until like I only garnered respect for it last year. Now I love it. Like I'm such a big fan of it. Has been my Venus square Saturn, which like has been written about through the centuries. I want to say, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just been not been
Uh-huh.
a he hasn't gotten a fair due, right?
Right,
Like
right.
it's been written about fatalistically. And thank goodness for that, because I wouldn't have been inspired to really take a big inventory into why squares are written about in the way they are, right? Like why did I don't want to butcher the language, but like Lily referred to it as like, being like squares have something to do with like being total enmity with each other. Like that is such thick, murky language to refer to a square as. And why is that? And so created this YouTube channel where we talk about the potential to unlock within each square, and like in no way are we dismissing the hard work that's involved in squares, especially Saturn squares, let's just say, since the Saturn square vibe is different from a lot. But I think it's really in taking a critical lens to writing of natal astrology, and just sort of like, discussing it with other astrologers. So I'd say aspects is a huge thing. Just taking a very 2021 look at aspects, with paying homage and having the utmost deference and respect for the astrologers, of the eons, throughout the eons, right, who have contributed to us being able to do what we do, right? Bowing my head to them for sure, but also adding my own opinion and say, and I'm sure you've seen the comments on some of those videos. It's like people would say that they've been sobbing over their natal chart because they don't feel like they'll ever be whole, because someone told them that their sun square Saturn means that they're never going to be good enough for anything in life. And it's like, it's so sad to hear that astrology can be used to like limit people so much, when actually it should be used to bolster our most high-minded selves.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I do, I mean, like you said, the comments that you're getting on those videos, people are really resonating with them. They are really making a difference. So yeah, so I think that's it's definitely worthwhile to be always, I think always find, as astrologers, finding ways to create a language around astrology that is uplifting, that is uh,
Amen.
that makes people feel powerful in their lives.
Totally. I was raised Jewish, and I am Jewish still. And like one of the most core Jewish tenets is to just say why. Like always just like say why, like why. And so, I think that really applies to learning anything, but especially in learning about like the harsh aspects of oppositions and squares. Like why are we calling this something that is like so difficult, and why are we shuddering at the thought of someone having Mars square Pluto, which, like, don't get me wrong, comes with its serious challenges, but there's also such beauty that can be found in that aspect, or like any square or opposition per se to work with. So I'd say aspects are huge, and then outside of that, being very mutable and very saggy, just like, I love how open of a field it is. Like, I follow fixed star astrologers, I follow Hellenistic astrologers, I follow astrologers who focus on psychology and using like the intersectionality of psychology and astrology. And so just such deference for all different forms of that, for sure.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's one thing. Uh, I think that's why another reason why I love astrology too is because like you can study it forever and still feel like you've only touched the tip of the iceberg.
Amen. I feel like astrology is one of the fields where the imposter syndrome only grows. Like, the more that you get into it and the more you learn, because it's
Yeah.
truly like, just like space, I feel like, is limitless. Like,
Uh-huh.
there's just limitless stuff to learn.
Uh-huh. Totally, totally. Yeah. Well, Lars, this has been such a great conversation, and I'm hoping it's one of many more.
Yes.
So where can people find you and hear more of what you have to offer?
For sure, yeah. So I have my website, because that was something that came with my Saturn entering into Aquarius. So it's liveyourtruithlars.com. I also have an astrology themed Instagram page, just devoted to astrology, covering a broad range of topics. That would be LYT_astrology on Instagram. And then YouTube, just my name, Lars Mellis. You could see my series with you. I also have just started a series on singers and looking at their year ahead, kind of just giving people an intro into how a professional astrologer would conduct a 20 to 30-minute year ahead consultation, but it's with Ariana Grande or insert singer here. So definitely those would be the places.
Great, excellent. Well, thank you so much, and keep us updated on how things pan out as you're moving past and your Saturn return and beyond.
Will do. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks.